Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Conor Heaney. Conor is the managing director at CXE EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Conor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's show where I'm delighted to be joined by Bruce Morton, founder of Bruce Morton Consulting. I've had the pleasure of knowing Bruce for some years now. Bruce is great value for insights, expertise and experience into the world of work, future work and extended workforces. Bruce recently spoke at an event for us in London, and I think it's fair to say, Bruce, our audience were blown away by what you had to say. And I think this is your second time coming on the show, Bruce, but it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. And can't wait to hear about your phenomenal career, but also your next career and the next stages of what you're going to do next. And I think your consulting firm is going to be a big part of that. So, Bruce, a warm returning welcome to the show. How the hell are you?
Great, thank you, and thanks for having me back on. Back by popular demand.
Yes, that's it.
So yeah, good to see you, brother.
Yeah, you too, brother. And what I should have mentioned is that Bruce is a published author. He's one of the co-founders of the Universal Workforce Model concept, Bruce. And if you haven't read his book, along with Simon Bradbury, I highly recommend that you do. So Bruce, second time on the show. Don't want to rehearse too much, but what's your story? Because I want to hear about your consulting firm and all the problems and challenges that you're going to solve for it. But if our audience haven't listened to your first appearance, can you just give a bit of a pop quiz on your background and story, if that's okay?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So I stumbled into this industry like most people did, certainly back in the day when I did, 45 years ago, in 1980. Went to a staffing agency looking for a job, and they're like, "Well, you sound like you're pretty smart, and you can you pick up a phone and read the yellow pages? Can you start Monday?" And that's how I got into the industry, supplying HGV drivers of all things to transport companies in Birmingham in the UK. And then I moved into sales recruitment. I was in that for a number of years and worked my way up inside that organization. And then approached by James Khan, EMS, Alexander, and joined as the commercial director. I guess the I-10 as we grew the RPO practice, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then I had my own organization for a while, which was employer branding, employee engagement. And I ended up selling that into an organization in Asia, Talent 2. Joined that organization, that business Talent 2, we then merged on a few projects or partnered on a few projects with Allegis Global Solutions. And then, long story short, Allegis ended up buying Talent 2 and that kept me in the US, and I've been here for 16 years. Connecticut's the first 14, the last couple I'm now in Florida. And then as of December 31st last year, I retired from corporate life to semi-retirement, where I set consulting.
Wow, Bruce, I forgot that you were in the sector and industry for 45 years, and I think one of the things I'm really that is good going. But Bruce, I think
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear your thoughts later in the show about the evolution of the staffing sector. But Bruce, one of the things I've observed about you is the constant innovation, the constant iteration. And I think anyone, if they're thinking about a career in our sector, would be well disposed to look at how you've constantly morphed or moved ahead of the times. Because when I think about the future of work, Bruce, I think about you, right? I think about the way you deconstruct things. And I think that's testament to you, Bruce, because some people, that might be in a sector or an industry for 45 years might become jaded by it. But I would argue that you've probably become energized throughout that time, because you're constantly looking for the next in our sector, how to make it better, how to make organizations better when it comes to attracting, engaging, and managing and finding talent. So I can't wait to hear more about that. But Bruce, what about your consulting company? What are you going to be doing with it, and what are you going to be advising companies on?
Yeah, if we put it into, I guess, three big buckets. One is helping organizations that provide tech into this industry. Let's call it HR tech, helping them navigate the space, helping them with their product development. In some instances, perhaps raising the next round of capital, that sort of thing. So that's the one piece of it. The other would be to continue to be the thought leader in the space by producing content, ties in with public speaking engagements. And then the last piece would be working with some of the associations to help them reinvent, might be too strong a word, but help them to continue to energize their audiences by making sure that the topics on the agenda and the way those things are presented are very much future fit. And so, yes, that's how I think about the business and having fun doing it.
And Bruce, I hadn't thought to ask this question, but I hope you don't mind, and you can just tell me to go away. But having lived the sort of corporate life of constant travel myself, at least over the last 10 years, and particularly over the last 8, I think I'm probably home, if that's the right word for it, maybe 1 week a month, or maybe 2 on a good one.
Right.
What was it like for you when, on the, let's say, the first of the month, when you finished your last role, and you went, okay, no plane, no travel, no hotel, I got to do this myself, I've no regular paycheck coming in. Like, what did that feel? Did you feel free? Did you feel free, or did you miss that sort of infrastructure and comfort, if you like?
Yeah, but it wasn't that different, to be honest with you. I've never, ever had an assistant in 45 years.
Wow.
I've been offered one with every company I've worked for. Well, not when I was more junior, but, since I've been in executive positions 20 odd years, all of my colleagues that were at the same level as me had assistants. And I'm like, nope. And mostly because my travel changed so often, it would be harder for me to contact that assistant to say, cancel that flight, move this flight, change that hotel. I just do it myself.
Right.
Independent. So that hasn't changed, although my wife is now quasi taking that position. So you see how that goes. We did make the decision, and to come to the other part of the question. So I wanted to make sure that we put a moment in time on the calendar so I could recognize the transition from corporate to self-employed. So our wife and I, Kate, we went to India for a month. And 10 days of that was at a wellness retreat, yoga, massage, meditation, complete detox. That was pretty amazing. We got in touch with ourselves, let's put it that way, powered ourselves. So that was but my third day there, 7:00 in the morning, I was on a call, and I realized that was the only call I had booked for that whole month.
Wow.
Wow, this is the first time I've been on vacation in 35 years when I haven't had conference calls on my calendar every day, which is crazy. I'm really bad. I totally admire people that can shut down for a week or two. I've just never been able to. I'm on my third marriage, but anyway, that's a story. But this is far more understanding, Kate. But anyway, so it was nice to actually have. But it did freak me out a bit. You keep checking your phone and thinking, why is nobody emailing me? What's going on? Bit of a FOMO going on. But so since I'm now back in the rhythm, unfortunately, I'm traveling as much as I was before.
I see.
I'm trying not to. So there was a plan for somebody listening and that might be in a similar situation. That a good plan was, I thought, well, what about let's make myself Wednesdays. So at least I'll break the week up 2 days, down 2 days. So I joined a Wednesday morning golf league that would give me that focus. I joined there 3 months ago and I played twice. So the plan is excellent, but you got to follow through on it. So my advice is make the plan, but stick to it. So, and the next month I'm traveling every week, but my wife's kind of with me. So we're trying to get some time together that way.
Lovely, Bruce. And I can sense the freedom from that, Bruce, that you've got. So yes, you're back on the sort of roller coaster, but it's almost on your terms, isn't it? And if you can bring your wife and your family along, I mean, that's bloody great. So I think I'd like to get to that point myself, Bruce, and because I can only afford one marriage at the moment. So
So in fact, I was chatting about. I'm in New York as we speak. So I was sold home last night, and we were chatting about next week where we're going to Atlanta for the Talent Partners TR Awards.
Oh, wonderful.
And Kate said, just remind me, what's that thing we're at again next week? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I'm speaking in the evening and after dinner speech. Oh, hang on, what sort of dinner? Yeah. Right, black tie. She's like, you didn't tell me it's black tie. So now she's stressing about what cocktail dress she's got to like. And I'm like, oh, I was glad you asked.
I love it. Well, listen, Bruce, it sounds like it's going incredibly well. Bruce, I want to touch on something that's been referred to as the labor market paradox. I think the last time you were on, we only scratched the surface because we were looking at the universal workforce model, I think, in quite some detail. But one of the things that intrigued me about when you were speaking at a recent event in London, Bruce, was around some of the demographic challenges that Western, and this is generally a problem, it seems, for Western labor markets around demographics and a demographic deficit or a demographic drought. It's referred to various ways. But in short, Bruce, Western labor markets, particularly European Union and the USA, have not been producing enough people over, I think it's around a 60-year period. It really started to decline around the 60s, 70s. What seemed to be saving some of those demographic problems, Bruce, was inward migration into Western labor markets. And as most keen observers will appreciate, there's been a lot of restrictions and regulations around that. So you've still got this fundamentally huge problem. And I don't think a lot of policymakers and businesses are actually alive to this, not through any fault of their own. I think it's just sort of just crept up upon them. But when we look at this problem, Bruce, this demographic problem, how concerning should that be for businesses that operate in Western labor markets that typically draw upon a talent pool or worker pool in Western labor markets? And also, how concerned should policymakers be about this particular problem, Bruce, in your view?
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there. If you think about when baby boomers were named baby boomers, it's turned out to be the incredible phrase that's whoever thought of that, because before then, people had more babies than they have been having during the last 20 years. But since the baby boomers, people have been having less children. So it really was a defining moment of the peak of childbirth in the developed world. And I think what's happened now, as we think about developing or developed is truly a past tense phrase now from a population size. So literally every developed country are now starting to go backwards in terms of their size, their population. And as you think about that from a demographic perspective, and I always say to people, just Google demographic pyramids, and it's such an awesome site. You can literally select a year, select any country in the world, and it will show you the breakdown of their with the people that are living in the country at that point, by age group. And in the ideal world, what you want is in a growing population, it's kind of like that. But most countries now is the opposite way. So, very except for China, because of the one-child policy. And I always amuse myself thinking I'd love to have been in that meeting when somebody woke up to the fact that was hurting them, and they were like, "I think it was your idea, that one-child policy." No, I think you suggested that. So the blame game on that, I think, would have been a fascinating conversation. Also realize now the damage of that. As I said at your event, in Tokyo, you order Uber Eats, and a 90-year-old guy staggers up your steps to deliver the food because there's just no kids there to do those jobs. So as you think about that and those demographic shapes, organizations need to be very aware of that. And it's a beautiful pictorial way to think about it for two reasons. One is our workforce is shrinking, or our potential workforce, people that can actually become a workforce, is a smaller group. And typically most organizations, if they're in there selling a service or selling goods in a consumer space, the consumers are shrinking as well. So the two answers for that. The one is the answer for the shrinking humans is to allow more people into the country. And the other one, to get away from the shrinking consumer base, is to export. Both of those two things are being attacked right now. Perhaps that's, I don't want to get too political by use of it, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean by that.
I do.
They're being restricted, and there's big changes afoot with tariffs and lack of immigration, etc. So organizations need to be thinking, in a perfect world, if I was the CEO of an organization, I would get my board together and say, right, just paint a picture for me on this big wall in this room. Imagine a massive whiteboard the length of the room. How are we getting work done right now? Show me where the humans are. Show me how long they've been with us, how much they're costing, what their skills are, what type of contract we have with those individuals. Are they an employee, a contractor, a freelancer, or the end of some service provider? Paint that picture and say, okay, that's how we're getting work done today. And now, of course, we need to add in the AI element of that. What percentage of that work is being done by agentic function? Okay. Now, let's look at the CEO's statement to the board and to the city of what the CEO and board are saying, telling people you're going to do in the next 2 years. What does our organization architecture and structure needs to look like to achieve that goal of 24 months from now? So now you've got a plan, because we need to move from the left-hand wall to the right-hand wall. And how are we going to do that? And in those conversations, if one of your answers is we need to hire more people in Palo Alto, then somebody needs to have a serious word with you. Right? So, it gets people to think differently. So, well, actually, we're going to need a number of, let's call them FDEs, the forward deployed engineers, which is the hot AI role at the moment. Where are those people in the world? We don't know. Well, you better find out. Let's scan, all this information is out there, labor market analytics, skill set analytics, LinkedIn itself has all this information. So where should we be thinking about putting that type of work in the world? And I do think there's it's a bit of, I'm fantasizing a bit, but I do think we're going to get more and more to countries and regions being known for skill set than they are right now. So I think we've always, certainly in Europe, if anybody says, well, where do all the cool design people hang out? You're going to say Scandinavia, probably because of IKEA, but there's some truth in that. If you think about cybersecurity, you want to go to Israel. If you think about the voice to text, all of the development now, you go to Egypt. So there's certain countries now that are developing certain skill sets. China invested hundreds of billions of dollars into parts of South Africa to build AI capability. So, okay, that might be a happy hunting ground just around the corner. So armed with all that information, now you can actually have a true strategic workforce plan to move from left wall to right wall. Long-winded answer to your question, but I think that's that's some of the shifts we're seeing at the moment. And
Yes.
I don't think many organizations have got their arms around it yet. So like anything, you might be better off just starting somewhere with a pilot as opposed to boiling the ocean and say, well, let's just take this, marketing function or perhaps just one country. But having those conversations at a board level with all of the board members, this isn't an HR thing. This isn't a procurement thing. It's not an IT thing. It's an everything thing, right?
Yes.
And we're already seeing that, with the well shared story just last week about, the Moderna, grouping together HR and IT.
Fascinating.
So I think there's moves afoot, but organizations cannot ignore it.
Yeah. I really appreciate the depth to that answer, Bruce, and I agree with you. Like, just on the topic, there's probably two things I want to unpack, Bruce. The first is the strategic workforce planning point, and then I probably want to look just generally at well, what happens actually when the consumers shift, right? So if we look at, let's say, Nigeria, their population is forecast to be roughly 1 billion by 2100, right? Roughly 400 million, I think, by 2050 and more, right? And then if you flip that back to China, that's likely to half by 2100. The present day population is, let's say, 1 billion plus now. It's going to be about 500 million is what they're saying in 2100. So what happens to consumers? What happens to the world of work? Assuming there is a world of work, which I want to come on to later. Of course, I don't want to scare our listeners with any dystopian weird fantasies from me. But Bruce, just looking at strategic workforce planning, if we may, it's something I've got an unusual interest in. So Doug Leby, the CEO of Beeline, has often talked about, well, in the context of VMS, vendor management system technologies, it's about people, not pencils. And I accept that premise. I agree, right? People are different from, widgets or this bottle that I'm holding up here beside me. But some of the principles of resource demand planning, in whether you're making a pencil, a bottle, a ship, a plane, a desk, a screen, surely we can take some of their first principles and best principles and incorporate that into strategic workforce planning so that we can actually marry up demand for talent with available supply, whether that supply is within your organization, adjacent to your organization, in the external market, or some sort of orchestration layer where you're going to go and buy a bot. And firstly, my question is, do you agree with that, Bruce, that perhaps we can learn from our brothers and sisters in the wider supply chain world? That's question number one. And then question number two, Bruce, is, would you have any advice that you can give to enterprises that are thinking about strategic workforce planning in terms of what they might, or consider doing?
Yeah. So the first point, I think that there are definitely things to be learned, but the challenge that we have is most organizations and our industry, to an extent, starts in the wrong place. We start with the talent instead of the work. So the first piece of advice is you're already one step ahead of yourself. So come back, think about the work, deconstruct that work task by task, and now have the conversation. What is the best way to get that task done? You've heard me talk about to my mind, the best comparison is the quantity survey in the construction industry, because a good quantity survey, you can give them a blueprint of a building, and they will tell you, calculate exactly how many bricks you need, how much bolts, how many miles of wire, how much each one has a cost, what order should arrive at the site, how long it should take, what labor you need to get it finished. And then the bottom corner gives you that number of, okay, this is the cost. The reason that the construction industry gets a hard time when somebody's having a kitchen extension, it says it cost me twice as much, it took me 3 times as long, is because of scope creep. Oh, now you're here. Could you just? And these poor builders get a hard time because they've got 4 of the jobs stacked up. They're not going to say no, so they end up letting people. Anyway, So if you think about the quantity surveyor inside an organization, that doesn't exist. Now, there are obviously some companies out there, I'm generalizing for effect, but how many organizations have a chief workforce officer or a head, work orchestration leader, as a phrase has been knocked about, work distribution design, as I call it, that isn't happening.
No.
And they have to throw it to HR, and HR are like, well, you tell me what I need to go find, I'll go find it for you.
Yeah.
But I'm not the one advising on that. So there's a massive, massive gap there. So I think that's the starting point, is don't start with the talent, start with the work. Now, on that point, the VMSs have all been designed for a world that is sort of shrinking, because they were designed to start with the rec.
Correct.
Right? The starting point of a VMS is you go in and you create a rec. As we see the growth of the independent workforce and freelancers, outpacing the growth of contractors, each of those situations start with the worker. So hopefully a bit of simple design, but we need a different starting point. Start with the work and then the worker, not with the rec. So that leads nicely, actually, nice segue to the second part of the question about strategic workforce planning. That is strategic workforce planning, just the way I described it. So, you don't need well, they help. There are some really good tools out there that can do the scenario planning and forecasting and everything else. But what we're seeing now, without a doubt, is as companies look under the hood of this and they're worrying and wondering what AI is going to do for us, it's almost impossible to know whether you'll know that person you hired today in a year's time, in 2 years' time. Will I still need that skill set from a human? Will it be more augmented with technology? So that shrinks that job. So in a way, people are like, well, why would I hire somebody in today's environment? And I think that is one of the big impacts we're seeing in the growth of the independent contractors, freelancers, and traditional contractors, because it's just a safer bet for organizations. Because anybody that plays with, the common platform like ChatGPT, whatever it can do for you today, in 2 months' time, it's going to make that look very amateur. So I think, the concept of strategic workforce planning should be around how can we get our arms around how we're getting work done today and how do we feel we're going to get it done in the future, and just start on the journey. Go pick a function or a country. I mean, people have just got to stop talking about this stuff and actually get on with it.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting enough, Bruce, there's a platform I've got to know the founder of pretty well. I think he's shared an organization with us both in the Legis group called Rich Wilson. He's based out of the UK up in Scotland, and he's got a really interesting platform called gigged.ai. And in short, Bruce, it was something we talked about the other week in London when we were together, a platform that has internal skills or can help organizations build an internal skills marketplace. They've also got access to an open talent marketplace, and they're also building an orchestration layer where organizations can bring their own agent, right? And I can't wait to see where platforms like that and others will go. But it strikes me that there's some interesting use cases there, Bruce. Would you agree with that? And listen, there are other platforms out there, by the way. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. WorkLarm, we're doing some really interesting stuff in that space as well. And I think that the organizations are starting to realize that it's great having these, what we call digital workers, and now agents and agentic, but who's actually looking after them and keeping them on the rails? At some point, there will be a test case where some bot does something that they shouldn't have done. And then that's going to be an interesting court case, who takes them on and how do you get insured for that? But the more organizations, in a bizarre way, the more that they can think about these as digital workers and almost an entity that is now doing that job that a human was doing, I think that's easier for them to actually get on the journey, because it becomes real, because you're replacing a human with a bot as opposed to just conceptually, how can we use AI?
Yeah.
I think, the challenge organizations, well, one of the many challenges they're having is, how do you prove to the CFO that the increase in productivity, or the person that was doing 40 hours is now only doing 20 because the bot's doing the other 20, how are you filling their time?
Yes.
So is this truly hard savings, or is it soft? Because if it's soft, and we have a tendency to say, yeah, this is great because the AI is doing all the menial work, so our people can be more consultative. They can add more value to the client. They can move up the value chain. But are they really doing that? How do you pinpoint that? And sometimes it's, you have to do a straight swap replacement for the CFO to say, yeah, okay, I can tick the box now. You've saved money there.
Yeah.
As opposed to the other end of that equation would be how we're measuring the increase in productivity, to my mind, is a more positive way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree with your analysis, Bruce. And I think WorkLarm, I've built a really amazing platform, actually. And one of the things that I've noticed about the platform is that they've incorporated strategic workforce planning or resource demand planning into it. I think that's one of the more recent features that have come into the platform. And I really can't wait to see what the team are going to do there. And I think they've already got a brand that most people in the sector recognize and know. And I think I think though it's an interesting one, Bruce, not just for work llama, but more for direct sourcing. Um, I don't think we're prepared to discuss this, Bruce, but I think the way direct sourcing technology has been framed and the commercial model that has traditionally existed around it is problematic. I think when it initially came out, it was almost put on a comparison basis between traditional staffing or recruitment, and it was charged for like traditional staffing or recruitment essentially on a contingent model. But it strikes me that platforms such as Worklama and indeed others should probably have a different commercial model because I think it's fairer, but also better for the end user as well. What's your take on it, Bruce? Do you think the commercial model needs to change?
Yeah, I think that, no, I think commercial model, I think the challenge a lot of the direct sourcing platforms and tech partners had is they're sort of giving their software away and then, charging a percentage of the spend.
Yes.
Well, if nobody's using the thing, there's no percentage to be had. So I think they all learnt the lesson from those early days that you still got to recruit. And I know I have a total dislike for the phrase curation. I thought a curator was a guy that sat in the corner of a stuffy museum. So I thought she'd speak that exciting. But so anyway, putting that aside, I think that you still need recruiters actually working those jobs and selling the job and pitching the compelling story and all the rest of it. So I think that the industry's come a long way with that, which is good. But the concept of direct sourcing, if you go to Europe, it just means you're filling jobs. It doesn't mean you're finding contract labor that using a staffing company.
Correct.
And I think that what's going to morph or help morph some of those services and products is that we see more the contingent program, the non-employee program, sitting under TA and HR.
Maybe if we want to focus on what organizations can do to win the war on talent, Bruce.
Yeah, I guess as I was saying earlier, and I'm not quite sure how organizations do this, but somebody needs to take the lead and literally get the exec suite in a room together and educate them on everything that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes. And whatever way that takes to bring that to life, because all organizations are different. And I think some organizations are incentivized by opportunity. Others are incentivized by fear. So is it the carrot or the stick? I think they need to think about that. What's the best way of getting work done? But a simple, I guess I can call it a trick or simple tactic would be better that I've used over the years with prospects is I go to the company website and download the chairman or CEO statement. And I can guarantee in there the 3 or 4 things that the CEO or chairman is talking about, you can bring back to work and talent. So, if the CHO looks at that, the CFO, the CIO, whoever they are, just read that thing and say, right, these are the things that are really important. These are the things we've committed to the external world about. How the heck are we going to get this done? And then how do you create that burning platform around that and stop making it or trying to make it an HR or procurement initiative because it isn't. It's business imperative. I think that's the starting point, that it just takes somebody to grab it, metaphorically speaking. And that might even be legal. We've when I was at Legis, a couple of our very large tech clients, the global expansion was driven by legal because of compliance and risk and everything else. So, it might be the global head of sales is worried about where their consumers are going to be in the future, whatever it may be. But attach this initiative, this program to some business imperative and get on with it.
Yeah, I think that's sterling advice. And Bruce, one of the things that you and I spoke about a number of times over the years is about AI and its potential impacts on jobs. I think it is actually having an impact on jobs. If at Microsoft, I think they had an amazing profitable year last year for the financial year 2024, and they still let off, I think, around 7,000 people at the last count, partly in response to AI being able to do some of the work. World Economic Forum, in their last 3 reports, have talked about fast waves of jobs displacement, essentially job losses. And although they say new jobs will be created, they haven't really specified how many, by when, and what type. So I think the direction of travel is potentially and actually concerning for some, particularly if you're impacted by that. Are you concerned, Bruce, about the potentially negative impact of AI on jobs? And also, are you positive on potentially what AI can do for jobs and also for society?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an actual optimist, so I'm incredibly positive about it. I think the two areas of concern, one is attached to AI and one isn't, but the one that's attached to AI is, as we use more and more technology to do all of that stuff that beginners used to do. So your first year in the job, your first year in this industry, that's stuff you did. But Andy Hilger, who used to be the CEO of Allegis, just posted on LinkedIn today, AI would have killed my job back in 2001. And he wouldn't have got to be the CEO because he wouldn't have been able to learn the things he learned while he was going through. So if all of that entry level work, if that's going away, how do we get people ready to jump straight into the next level up job? That's a good challenge. That's a really good challenge. And the other one, to add to that, and I'll give you a personal story of one of my children. Gwen lives in LA, and she graduated from Loyola Marymount in LA and wanted to stay there and got a job in the staffing industry for an awesome company, but it was fully remote. So here she is 2 years later, loving the job, loving the industry, loving her colleagues, but just needs to get out of her apartment, and that, you can imagine he's not earning that much and living in LA. She got a shoebox of an apartment. So she today, funny enough, yesterday was the first day in a new job where she's going into the office, and she could not be more excited because now she's going to learn and really, go to the next level. So I think that whole virtual workforce for beginners and entry, I think long term we'll see the damage that it's had. So those are the two things that concern me. I think from, are the jobs going to disappear? No. I remember when I was 14 years of age, living in Birmingham in England, and there was a television program you might remember called Tomorrow's World.
Yes, great show.
And it was all about the future. And that guy stared out of our magic box in the corner, the black and white thing, and looked straight at me and said, by the time you're 30, you won't have to work because the robots will do all our work. He lied to me. Here I am, 65, still working. So I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think we're just going to hopefully create a much better society, use AI and its incredible capability of, saving human beings and fixing problems that we have from a health perspective right now. So overall, I think it will end up creating more jobs than it gets rid of.
Well, here's to that. And Bruce,
but the interesting about that kind of great example of that is how quick the world's moving. You remember about a year ago, the hottest job on the planet suddenly came from nowhere, and it was a prompt engineer.
That's it.
2 months later, it disappeared because people realized ChatGPT could write the prompt for you. So it was the hottest job for 2 months. They're like, oh, we don't need them. So that's going to be interesting to see what as those pop up and then disappear again.
Yeah, I agree. And Bruce, if we may, can we finish with a question we ask all our guests? And last time you were on, we asked yourself and Simon Bradbury, what, if any, prediction for the future of work would you care to make? And I suppose I'd love to ask you that question again, Bruce, if I may.
Yep. The big one, I'll just give you one, otherwise we're going for hours, is that within 5 years, we'll see enterprises having a institutionalized way of sending work to Africa.
Yes, Bruce. Yes, Bruce. I love hearing this because I think that's the direction of travel. You hear this phrase, the trend is your friend, but I think in this case it is. Africa has the demographic and talent and skills solution to the problems that Western and developed labor markets are facing. So I'm all in on that one, Bruce, and it's great to hear that you are too. Bruce, it's so good to have you on the show again. Thank you for making the time. I wish you every success in your next chapter and in your second career. Although you've had a career of many over that 45-year period with Bruce Morton Consulting. Bruce, how can our audience reach out to you? What's the best way to get in touch with you, Bruce, to advise on what they do?
BruceMortonConsulting.com or find me on LinkedIn. Be great to connect.
Brilliant. Bruce, so good to see you, and thanks for all your support, and thanks again for at our events, and take care. Safe travels in New York and back home.
Cheers, Conor.
See you soon. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Great seeing you.
Take care. Likewise. Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Conor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.